Perfect. It looks like we've got a good group of people connected. In the interest of time, we will try to stick to our 12 p.m. start. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our co-hosted webinar through the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence for Canadian Veterans and the Chronic Pain Network. I'd like to begin with a few housekeeping items. This webinar will begin with an introduction to the Chronic Pain Network, which will be presented by Dr. Norm Buckley. Norm, if you want to give a wave there. Followed by an introduction to the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence for Canadian Veterans, which will be presented by Dr. Abhimanyu Sood. Dr. Sood, thank you very much. And you'll learn about our RFPs coming up as discussed. So a few other items. My name is Chelsea White. I'm the Senior Manager of Research and Veteran Engagement with the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence. I'm also joined by a few other colleagues here from CPCOE, including Doug Rust, who will help manage this webinar. He's a research coordinator. Doug, if you want to give a wave so everyone knows who you are. We're also joined by our chair of our scientific advisory board and our director of research partnerships, Dr. Luc J. Hebert. And of course by Dr. Norm Buckley, as I have already mentioned. You will have seen when you join this webinar that this is being recorded so that CPCOE can make this available on our website for anybody who was not able to join us today. We would kindly ask that you save all of your questions to the end of the webinar. You are welcome to submit your questions directly to Doug or in the chat throughout, but we will save the Q&A until the end. If you would prefer to not enter your question into the chat, you can request to be unmuted as well, and Doug will take care of that for you. So without further ado, I'll now introduce you to our first speaker, Dr. Norm Buckley. He is the nominated principal applicant for the Chronic Pain Network, and he will introduce us to the Chronic Pain Network. For those of you who are not aware, CPCOE is continually grateful to the Chronic Pain Network. Since CPCOE started in 2020, Dr. Norm Buckley and the CPN team have kindly helped us get launched and have given us many principles in patient engagement that have helped us now in 2024 be able to offer these RFPs in the way that we have. So we're very grateful for Norm and team. And Norm, I will pass it over to you to share your slides.
Great, thanks very much, Chelsea. And as often is the case, I think the children are exceeding the successes of the parent. The COE's taken off, I think, really well, and it's good to see it go. So as you heard, this is about some opportunities in obtaining research funding in the pain field, which is important and also I think a little bit lacking. Because I have the opportunity to shamelessly self-promote, we'll do that. I just want to remind people, if you're not aware of the Chronic Pain Network, it is funded by the CIHR, the Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research, and we set out in 2016 with the goal of changing the way pain is managed in Canada. It represented a number of unique things. It was the first research network, national network in Canada dedicated to pain research. And it was also the first time that the federal government and Health Canada and the CIHR as a funder had recognized chronic pain as an important research priority. And in fact, some of the work that came out of the Chronic Pain Network's knowledge mobilization efforts, along with 15 years of preliminary advocacy by many pain researchers, clinicians, and educators in the country, led to the Canadian Pain Task Force, which reported in 2021. And really, the Chronic Pain Network was the first time the CIHR or anybody had put a substantial amount of money into pain research. It was $12.5 million over 5 years. And because it is out of the program for patient-oriented research, that drove everything that we did. It drove the governance. All of our committees are co-chaired by people with lived experience. We have a patient engagement committee which connects researchers with patients who are knowledgeable in the process of research, and it educates patients in the process of research. and also developed priorities for conducting research and published several articles, some of which have gone on to be widely cited about compensation of patients in their research, as well as recognizing patients in research publications. As I said, one of the things that was undertaken was a partnership with the McMaster Health Forum, and conducted a deliberative dialogue at the end of 2017, which provided a framework which really guided the building of the Canadian Pain Task Force. And the Canadian Pain Task Force went on to, it was stood up in 2019 and submitted its first report within a few months of being stood up, describing the nature of pain and pain research in Canada. It went on to develop its final report, the Action Plan for Pain in Canada, which is recognized by the federal government and Health Canada as a strategy document for Health Canada and the federal government. And among other things, relevant to today's discussion, it recognizes the importance of focusing pain research on the veteran populations, and you'll hear why shortly. One of the other things that may be of interest to many people on the call, if you're not all aware, is that CPN created with the Health Information Research Unit at McMaster something called CPN Pain Plus, which is a literature surveillance service that allows you to sign up and receive notifications about articles which have been adjudicated as being demonstrating rigorous methodology in their clinical trials, and are also considered by experts in the pain field to be relevant and interesting. And these things will appear in your mailbox. It also provides a way to quickly and effectively search for articles on topics that you're interested in the pain field. And you can register for this. And you can register to be on the mailing list, but you can also register and join up as a rater if you wish. The Chronic Pain Network has partners across the country. It is truly a national network, and it really depends strongly on its partnerships because as you will have seen from the funding document, the investment from research institutes, philanthropists, universities, and provincial governments across the country are substantial. And over that 5-year period, there was $25 million worth of matching funding identified by the partners in the network. And these are the folks that continue to work with us, and we work with them, obviously. We've started a new knowledge mobilization program called In Motion. One of the first things that we put up was publicizing this article that appeared in the journal Pain from the group Impact, which described for pain research the importance of patient engagement, and also laid out strategies for conducting it. And the Canadian researchers were well represented in this, both researchers and patient partners from the Chronic Pain Network, from SKIP, the Solution for Kids in Pain Knowledge Mobilization Network, as well as several patient partners and the CIHR. So, the program, the patient-oriented research program at CIHR really has made an impact, and it's played out, I think, very solidly in the work of the Chronic Pain Network. The Canadian Pain Society's annual scientific meeting is being held in a few weeks now, and on the Monday, April the 29th, the Chronic Pain Network will be sponsoring breakfast before the full Pain Congress, the CPS Health Canada Pain Congress begins. And I know in addition to the breakfast that CPN is sponsoring, I'm also aware that the Centre of Excellence is sponsoring lunch, which I think is really an excellent way for both groups to get their messages across to not just the usual suspects at the annual scientific meeting, but also hopefully people from Health Canada and the bureaucracy to make them aware of the good work that's happening, and also the need, as always, for further funding. These are our socials, and as Chelsea said, the material is available, will be available on the website. So please keep in touch. We have updated the website, and Luke, you'll be pleased to hear that the French version of the website is almost fully operational. And the lay summaries that come along with the CPN Pain Plus work have now all been translated into French and are available in French on the website. And as new ones come in now, we're able to find a translator who was available and quick and accurate. And so we should be able to make that happen in real time now. So I thank you all for the opportunity of just reminding people of what's happening with the Chronic Pain Network. And as I said, it was a very exciting time, when we were a couple of years into running the Chronic Pain Network, when the team was asked to create the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence for Canadian veterans. And as Chelsea said, we made use of the experience that some of the staff at CPN had to help build the structures, and also our experience with patient engagement, and in the veteran case, engaging veterans in the activities from the very beginning. And so I'm going to turn it over now, I think, to Abby. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and look forward to the rest of the session today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Norm. Very generous of you to join us and to share about CPN, and also the sort of important roots of CPCOE and the work of CPN. Doug, if you want to load the slides for our part, thank you. All right, yeah, you can go to the next slide. So a little bit about what we want to primarily introduce today is our new set of requests for proposals for funding on veteran-focused pain research for the 2024-2025 fiscal year. But I'd like to, before we jump in there, I'd like to give you a little bit of context about the CPCOE, and particularly sort of how we developed our request for proposals, based on what kinds of processes and what kinds of priorities. Because I think that'll be helpful for potential applicants to be able to shape your applications to ensure good alignment with the priorities that have been identified by the CPCOE. So we're, as has been mentioned, we're a young organization. We've been around for about 4 years now. But as you see, I've already had an opportunity to have a substantial impact on the veterans health research, but then also more generally the pain research landscape in Canada. My role at the CPCOE is as Chief Scientific Officer, and Norm was actually my predecessor. And one of the first things that he sort of ingrained in me about the CPCOE was that it represents, really the largest essentially permanent investment in pain research in Canada. So we were established to enable research and improve the well-being of Canadian Armed Forces veterans and their families living with pain. And this grew out of a recognition, as we've as those of us who are involved in pain research or clinical practice in Canada or policy, we recognize there's a very high prevalence of pain in the general population across the lifespan, including children. We estimate about 1 in 5 people in Canada live with chronic pain. That rate is about double amongst Canadian Armed Forces veterans. Close to about 45%, even higher in female veterans than it is in male veterans. And so there's a recognized need to focus investments and research on this particular important priority population, recognizing that a lot of the pain that has developed, chronic pain that's developed amongst veterans, has been because of their service and because of their training. And so how can we use research to enable improvements in the quality of life, well-being, and care of veterans who are living with pain? As you may be aware, there are other research-focused centers that are also funded by Veterans Affairs Canada, the Atlas Institute, which is focused on mental health, and CIMVR, which is focused on the overall health research for military veterans. Next slide, please, Doug. So part of our goal is we recognize that there are a lot of fantastic researchers out there who are doing great work in pain research in particular, but they may not be attuned to the particularities of working with veterans or the needs of veterans. And we want to encourage all those excellent pain researchers in Canada and internationally, even if they don't have experience working with veterans, to take the plunge and get some experience and work with the CPCOE to expand the network of researchers who are able to, interested and committed to improving the well-being of veterans. Veterans, we estimate about 500,000 veterans in Canada, really distributed across the country. Particularly the largest number of veterans, of course, being in Quebec and Ontario, because of our population bases, but also because of the location of many of our military centers. Next slide, please. Some of the research that the CPCOE has funded, in fact, has identified the perceptions of veterans, of military veterans, as being of the very old, of the sort of World War II era veterans. And in fact, the majority or the relative majority of veterans are in the 25 to 60 age range. It's a much smaller proportion, about half of that, who are in the very old age range. And so when we think about veterans, we're often thinking about and should be thinking about people in their middle age, in the prime years of their life, who may be living with severe, disabling, persistent chronic pain that's interfering with their everyday well-being and their post-military life. We also need to think about the significant diversity in terms of gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation of the veteran population. Now we estimate about 20% of serving military are women, and that proportion is growing. And so that we're also going to see that being reflected in our veteran population. Next slide, please, Doug. In many ways, because of our origins with the through the SPORE and chronic pain network, but also because of the orientation and disposition of CPCOE, veterans really sit at the center of everything that we do at the organization. I joined the CPCOE about 2 years ago, and that was one thing that I was most impressed about by the organization, is how central veterans who are living with pain are to setting the agenda and the priorities for the CPCOE, our organizational activities, and more importantly for today, our research funding. One of the main bodies through which this is achieved is our Advisory Council for Veterans, which consists of about now 15 veterans who are living with pain with quite diverse backgrounds. And we have a number of ways of engaging with our Advisory Council, or ACV. One of the most important ones is through our priority setting process. Over through the history of the CPCOE, we have taken guidance from the Advisory Council for Veterans on an annual basis to set our agenda for what we are going to fund and what we're going to focus on. Next slide, please, Doug. In the last year and a half or so, we have really formalized this process into a formal priority setting process informed by the James Lind Alliance priority setting partnership approach. I'm not going to go into great detail about what that process looks like, and I'll share with you in a moment our documentation and full report of our priority setting process, which we engaged in about 1.5 years ago. In general, we see sort of 4 important steps for the priority setting process that then is used to inform our request for proposals. So first, we solicit from our very large stakeholder group focused on veterans living with pain and their family members, as well as to some extent clinicians. We don't focus as much on policymakers and researchers because policymakers and researchers already have an outsized influence on what our research landscape and priorities look like. So our focus at the CPCOE is how do we sort of rectify that imbalance and center the needs, values, priorities of veterans living with pain to sort of rectify that and make more of a balance so that we're making sure that what we are researching, the knowledge that we're generating is going to be important and relevant to veterans living with pain. Now, not all the issues that are identified by veterans living with pain and their family members are going to be appropriate to be addressed through research. Some issues, some priorities, some needs might be better met by health system changes, by knowledge mobilization activities. And so our next step is this role of evidence checking, of saying, okay, we've solicited priorities, we've solicited sort of needs, identified needs from veterans. What does this look like against what we already know? Because there's no expectation. We can't have the expectation that veterans are going to know what the research landscape looks like. So we go through a process using our scientific expertise at the CPCOE. A lot of this work has been done by Doug, who's at the top of your screen, to identify, okay, what are the gaps? What is it that veterans are telling us that is important and that the literature is not able to answer? And so we use that sort of evidence checking process to identify uncertainties. And then we take those uncertainties, unranked, unprioritized, and put them and present them in front of our Advisory Council for Veterans. And through a structured process, a deliberative process, the ACV, Advisory Council for Veterans, helps us to develop and shape our list of ranked priorities. And you'll see in the full report, maybe you want to go to the next slide, Doug, that there are 20 ranked priorities that have been identified by our Advisory Council for Veteran. Okay. 10 gold priorities, 5 silver priorities, 5 bronze priorities. Sometimes the CPCOE staff lampoons me for using gold, silver, and bronze, but the idea behind that is that all of these priorities are important. Certainly some are more important than others, have been identified as a higher priority, but our gold, silver, and bronze priorities are all ones that we want to be able to address through our research. And so I encourage you all, especially for those of you who are considering applying, and I hope all of you are applying for our next round of funding, to review our priority setting report. It will help you get the context and understanding of how the priorities were determined and which of the priorities are being used to inform our next set of RFPs. So next slide, please, Doug. So I'm not going to cover all the research that we have funded at the CPCOE, but more than 60 projects around domains of well-being, the transition from military life to veteran life, post-military life, developing administrative definitions for veterans so we can make use of secondary administrative data, traumatic brain injury and pain, the role of ketamine, brain fog, and so on. Next slide, please. And we have funded projects in 8 provinces, 28 different institutions, 2 countries, and have invested more than $7 million in research since 2020. We also have, we're not going to cover this in detail today, but have a number of capacity building initiatives to support particularly master's, PhD, as well as actually now postdoctoral fellows in their journey to develop groundbreaking veterans health, veterans pain focused research. Okay. So next slide, please. So 2023, 2024 was the first competition that was based on the priorities that are outlined in the report that was just shared with you. I think it's been put in the chat now as well with a link. Thank you, Doug. And we have funded a number of projects that were applied to in that competition. And I want to highlight, the success rate for applicants from our previous RFP was 39%. So, and this is really the sort of zone that we want to be in for the CPCOE, where we know that the quality of the applications are high quality, are competitive, but it's not such a competitive competition that it acts as a deterrent for applicants to want to apply. So, about 4 out of every 10 applications, 3 to 4 out of every 10 applications to the CPCOE, we can expect to get funded. A few examples of funded projects, which will just be getting underway now, focused on things from identity transformation to understanding veteran experiences, conducting a systematic review and meta-analysis of non-pharmacological interventions for co-occurring chronic pain and PTSD. Next slide, please. Looking at pathways for developing resilience and empowerment, expanding rapid access to military adapted evidence-based psychological pain care. So really a wide variety of research methodologies, from systematic reviews to pilot trials to qualitative studies, policy analyses, economic analyses. There's quite a bit of methodological plurality in the applications and the funded projects that the CPCOE has funded over the last many years. Next slide, Doug, please. And you can go ahead to the next slide as well. Okay, so I'd like to now step over to our new round of RFPs. We have over $1.3 million in research funding available. The competition opened just a couple weeks ago, and the deadline for our applications is June 30th, 2024. We specified 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time this year, just so you know exactly when the deadline is. And yes, you are required to stick to that deadline. We will not consider applications after the deadline. We have 3 categories of submissions this year. If you look in the priorities, a number of priorities are really focused on pain and common comorbidities. We know, for example, that veterans, people in pain in general, live with a number of comorbidities, including mental health, but also other comorbidities. We've identified, for example, traumatic brain injuries and other service and also non-service related comorbidities that are very common amongst veterans. And, veterans don't present to care necessarily just with one condition or one concern regarding their pain, but together with a number of other comorbidities. So our first stream of RFPs is focused on assessing and improving quality of life of Canadian veterans living with chronic pain and common comorbidities. So the key part here is around specifically addressing quality of life. The second is around health system and policy innovations for Canadian veterans living with chronic pain. I'll go into that in some more detail. And then understanding the diverse experiences of Canadian veterans living with chronic pain. Next slide, please, Doug. So improving quality of life, successful applications in this stream will really focus on assessing and measuring impact around quality of life. The priority focus population has to be veterans living with pain. Any kind of common comorbidities that we see with pain, not necessarily only mental health, but other kinds of comorbidities are of high relevance to veterans and should be considered within applications to this stream. Particularly around, we've identified, support networks, including family members, peers, as a really important part of the lived experience of veterans and potentially having a significant impact on quality of life. So interventions or evaluations or other kinds of research focused on building the capacity of support networks to better improve quality of life are an important objective for this stream. Next slide, please, Doug. So, as some of you may be aware, military members receive healthcare through the Canadian Forces Health Services. It's federally funded, independently delivered healthcare services, sometimes on base, sometimes off base. When military members transition to become veterans, they transition across health systems, primarily accessing healthcare through the same provincial or territorial health systems that civilians access healthcare through. And so a lot of the issues that we see that at the health policy and health systems level that we're confronting more and more now as health researchers, as policymakers, as clinicians that are facing civilians are common to veterans as well. Okay, so we don't have a lot of knowledge yet around what pain services look like across jurisdictions. What are some innovations that are happening in Alberta that may be of value in Newfoundland or vice versa? Particularly as they may pertain to veterans, but also in ways we really have a strong commitment at the CPCOE, understanding that what's good for veterans is going to be good for civilians. We can find ways to improve healthcare service delivery, access for veterans that can have impacts for civilians living with pain as well. We also know that the vast majority of chronic pain care that's delivered in this country is in primary care. We also need good integration of that care with specialists and particularly interprofessional models of pain care. So understanding, developing models, evaluating models, tracking trajectories of care across the health system for people, particularly veterans living with pain, is another important objective for this stream. Next slide, please, Doug. As I alluded to earlier, the veteran population in Canada is very diverse and is becoming ever more diverse with time. We don't have a lot of understanding of what the different experiences of different population groups are amongst veterans living with pain. We don't know what their trajectories and experiences and pathways to care look like or differ across populations of different kinds of veterans or veterans with different backgrounds. And importantly, we don't know what opportunities there may be if there are important barriers to access, important barriers to good quality care. What kinds of interventions can help to improve access to chronic pain care and chronic pain management for diverse veteran populations living with pain? So this is our third stream. Next slide, please, Doug. So as I've mentioned, really all kinds of research are eligible. Pilot clinical trials, observational studies, evidence syntheses, qualitative studies, policy analyses. These are all important. Of course, you need to be able to demonstrate scientific rigor in your submission. We expect most submissions will be for about 1 or 2 year studies. We are in a position to contemplate multi-year studies, but obviously a longer duration of study time needs to be well justified. In terms of eligibility, principal applicants must hold an academic position at a Canadian or international academic institution and be eligible to hold research funds at that institution. If you're uncertain about your status to be able to hold research funds at your institution, you need to confirm that with your institution and attest to that in your application to the CPCOE. Next slide. So as I've mentioned, the application window is currently open until June 30th. In terms of timelines, we will be receiving and processing applications through the summer. Adjudication, which is led by the Scientific Advisory Board, and as mentioned, Dr. Luc Hébert has joined us, who's the chair for our Scientific Advisory Board, will happen in early September, and then decisions are communicated in the fall, and then proceed to contracting over the winter time. The applications are submitted by email to this email address, and all the information is quite well laid out on our website. So if you go to the next slide, this is, and we'll put this in the chat if it's not there already, this is the direct link to the RFPs. And if you follow this link, if you want to go to the next slide, if you go to our main page, click on the research drop-down menu and click on funding, and then next slide. And then you'll see the research funding link, and you'll see details for the research funding opportunities. Each of the streams has approximately 1 to 2 page background information, and then detailed application instructions. And we have quite extensive application materials for you to review that hopefully will answer a lot of your questions around what an application should look like, and encourage everyone who's considering to apply to read those application materials in detail. We're more than happy to answer questions as they come up, though often we may direct you, if it's answered in the application guide, we may be directing you back to the responses in the application guide. Next slide, please. So we'll open it up for questions. Some commonly asked questions that we do get are some of the ones that we've listed here. Do I already need to be doing research on veterans to apply? Absolutely not. As I've mentioned, part of our aspiration at the CPCOE is to increase the capacity for veteran-focused health research in this country and internationally. You will need to be able to demonstrate a substantive veteran engagement strategy as part of your research proposal. But as long as that is adequate, we don't necessarily require that you have already done research with veterans prior. And I think that kind of answers the second question as well. In terms of how to involve a veteran as a patient partner in your application. So we've identified a number of organizations that are veteran-focused organizations that we encourage you to reach out to. And this is an important part of the development process. Obviously, the priorities we've developed are informed by veterans, but how you choose to engage veterans is going to be up to each applicant. And we have resources as well around general patient engagement. There have been some fantastic resources that have been developed, for example, through CIHR, the Institute for Musculoskeletal Health and Arthritis, has developed a whole educational series for both researchers as well as people living with pain or people living with other conditions who are going to be involved and engaged as partners in research. And we encourage everyone, and we actually require that attest that you've completed some of that training as part of the application process. Okay. And you'll see in our veteran engagement guide really some clear instruction around or expectations around what the roles of veterans will be or can be in your research process. Okay, so we'll open it up for questions. I don't know if any questions have come through in the chat already.
We do have 2 questions that have come through, so I'm going to pass it over to Doug to present those, Abby.
Yep, so our first question is, do the 3 categories have their own dedicated funding, or do you simply fund the highest rated applications regardless of category? In other words, if an application could go to 2 different ones, does it matter which one you apply to?
Thanks, Tim. That's a fantastic question. So yes, it does matter which stream you apply to. And as part of the application process, you have to identify which stream your application is meant to be a part of, because part of the adjudication of every application is, as we see with other funding opportunities outside of the CPCOE, is the alignment of the application with the objectives of the funding stream. And likewise, we accept applications from principal applicants as principal applicant for 1 application per competition. So we can't put multiple or even similar or even different, like totally different submissions across multiple streams as a PA. If you're a PA on 1 application and a co-investigator on another application, that's perfectly acceptable to the CPCOE. Thank you, Norm, for posting some resources as well around patient engagement or patient-oriented research from CPN.
So our next question is an easy one. Are these slides available so we can email out? I believe Lauren's going to email out the slides along with the recording to those who registered. Our next question is from David. He said, thank you very much for the informative presentation regarding the health system and policy innovations for Canadian veterans living with chronic pain funding opportunity. Are projects that are regional or provincial in scope eligible? For example, if the focus was on veteran chronic pain programs / policies in the Atlantic region or Newfoundland and Labrador specifically, understanding, of course, that findings may be relevant beyond these jurisdictions.
Thank you, David. That's an excellent question. And yes, absolutely. There's not necessarily an expectation that a proposal cover every possible jurisdiction in Canada. As somebody who does comparative policy analysis, that's often very difficult to do. And so more local or regional focus for an application is perfectly acceptable.
Our next question from Alexandria. If our team is interested in floating / discussing a funding application, who is the best person to connect with to discuss potential relevance? Our work and proposal idea aligns with several of the RFP objectives, but there is also overlap between some of the streams.
Thank you for that question, Alexandria. We cannot provide specific advice to applicants around which may be the best potential fit. Encourage you to take a close look at each of the more detailed stream descriptions and choose the one that is of the most that you feel is the the strongest suit or most important or relevant for the kind of work that you want to do. It's important for us, as I've mentioned, the adjudication of funding proposals is done independent of CPCOE staff by our scientific advisory board. And so we cannot privilege any particular application by giving specific advice for that. We can answer questions around the application process, but in terms of sort of scientific merit or match to the objectives of a particular stream, the CPCOE will not give advice along those lines.
Our next question is from John. He asks, is CPCOE interested in partnerships with international research organizations and experiences of veterans experience chronic pain from NATO country militaries?
Thank you for that question, John. Yes, so we will certainly accept applications for funding from non-Canadian applicants. Part of the mandate for the CPCOE, an important part of the mandate, is we need to be able to demonstrate relevance of the research that we're funding specifically to Canadian veterans. So there are a variety of ways in which a proposal may do that. We expect, and you'll see this in the application guide, that for any application from a principal applicant that's international, we expect there to be at least one co-investigator who is at a Canadian institution, and then one veteran partner who is Canadian that helps do a few things. One is help to ensure relevance to the Canadian context. The other is to help build capacity, research capacity in the Canadian environment. So we are very interested. In fact, and Dr. Hebert and I will be traveling to the UK in about a month or so, presenting at the King's College Mental Health Research Conference on our work. And there's a number of, and I even see some researchers from abroad who've joined us today. So we're very keen to develop those partnerships. There's areas where Canada is very strong, and there are areas where we are weak relative to our peer countries. And so there's a lot of opportunity for synergy and partnerships. And I don't know if Dr. Hebert, if you want to add anything to that comment as our Director of Partnerships.
Yes, thank you, Abhimanyu. We are obviously interested in creating partnerships with colleagues outside Canada, especially in NATO. And we already, in fact, have partnerships with people from other countries. So yeah, that's on the radar. And this is something that we want to promote. And as Abhimanyu just mentioned, we're going to the UK in May, and that's our intention to consolidate our partnerships with our UK colleagues. So yeah, that's a very good point. And again, this is a high priority for the CPCOE.
Thank you, Dr. Hebert.
Next question from David. If he is a veteran with chronic pain, does he need to include a patient partner in the proposed project?
Thank you, David. That's a great question. There's not a hard and fast rule around principal applicants who are also veterans living with pain. I just encourage you to read through the application guide, and each application will be adjudicated based on pretty clearly identified criteria around the veteran engagement strategy. And so as long as you feel that the veteran engagement strategy that's proposed or part of your proposed research fulfills the criteria, the expected criteria for applications, that's perfectly acceptable. There's not necessarily if as a researcher you can also bring a important perspective of lived experience of pain as a veteran, that may satisfy expectations for applications.
Our next question from Andrea, is the CPCOE interested in funding pilot studies that might lead to larger studies in the future?
Thank you, Andrea. That's a fantastic question. And the answer to that question is absolutely yes. You know, the CPCOE recognizes where we fit within the larger research funding landscape. And in as much as possible, even intentionally, are aiming to coordinate our funding with larger funding bodies like CIHR or NIH. And one of our aspirations, and we would consider that a real success, would be to see a larger future for CPCOE funded projects that then may be able to go on to get larger funding from some of these better resourced, larger institutions that can support larger or longer funding envelopes for projects. So absolutely, pilot studies that could lead to larger studies in the future are certainly of interest to the CPCOE.
There
And
are no further questions in the chat.
Okay, and thank you, Norm, as very kindly, not surprisingly, has offered to consult with anyone. Norm does not have an official role with the CPCOE anymore, and so, but obviously knows quite a lot about the CPCOE, and so has offered to act as a consultant very kindly for anyone who's interested. All righty. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Of course, please do reach out upon review of the application materials. If you have any further questions, feel free to reach out. I believe we've put our email address in the, or if you could just put in the research email address in the chat, please, Doug. That's our sort of one point of contact for any questions that you may have for the research process. And we look forward to receiving and reviewing your applications for this year's RFPs.